Hi, guys, welcome back to another episode of Purple Conversations. I hope you are having an amazing week and you know that you are fully seen, fully known, fully loved, blessed, and covered by God. As you go forth this week, I ask you to be good to yourself and thus be good to other people. Today, I want us to talk about familiarity and all the different ways that can be a positive or a negative. Familiarity allows for, which a familiarity by its name suggests relationship. Now that can be positive relationship or negative relationship. Just because I'm familiar with a thing does not mean I have a positive interaction with that thing or a person or a place. I'm familiar with certain foods, or I'm familiar with certain sounds or smells or whatever. Familiarity does not always suggest positivity. And familiarity, we have a saying, familiarity breeds contempt, which means the continuous interaction allows for formalities to eventually fall away, and thus the space to broaden for disrespect to take place, or for taking advantage to be taking place, or for passing of boundaries to happen because of proximity, because of constant interaction, because of access that has been granted. People tend to now abuse that, or not even intentionally, but just by proximity, by the fact that we are familiar, by the fact that we talk every day, or we're in the same space every day, or I give you access or permission to be in my life and my space in certain ways. You now feel that gives you permission to be involved in everything, or that you have the authority to speak into certain spaces where I never gave you permission to. But because we're familiar in one area, that does not mean that you now have a broad space of familiarity to just do and say as you please. And that happens when we are familiar with people or places. Like the first time you walk into a bank, or the first time you walk into the gas station, or the first time you walk into a supermarket, or the first time you walk into a store, or the first time you walk into your job. The way you greeted or interacted these people is completely different from the 10th time that you have gone in and interacted with them. So the same level of formality, the same level of respect, the same level of caution, the same level of precaution that is taken, those things dissipate, those lines get blurred, because we've now interacted more than twice, 3 times, 10 times, and I now feel like there is some level of familiarity here, so my guard does not need to be up as much, my formalities don't need to be up as much, and certain things get taken for granted. Now that does not just happen with human interactions, that happens in the spiritual realm, because it has spiritual implications, because the more familiar we make ourselves with certain spirits, they're never going to stay in just that space. They're going to now feel like they have authority to operate in other spaces in your life. Like if you become familiar with the spirit of fear, but your fear was only around insects, but you keep that fear strong, that fear is now going to go into other areas. It's not just going to stay in the realm of insects or bugs or creatures. It is going to travel now into the fear of darkness. It's now, because then it's going to tell you that you don't know what creature might be in the dark. So now not just being afraid of the creatures is enough. I'm now afraid of the dark because of the possibility of creatures being in the dark. And it's not just going to stay to the dark. It's going to go into now your relationship with people, because you don't know what kind of creatures that person may be lurking with. So I'm using a fairly trivial topic, but you understand what I'm trying to say. It doesn't stay where you put it. So if you start tiptoeing with the spirit of depression, or if you're tiptoeing with the spirit of sadness, or if you're tiptoeing with the spirit of lies, or if you're tiptoeing with the spirit of gossip, it never stays where you put it, and they travel in packs. Just like peace, joy, patience, kindness, the fruits of the spirit, they all travel together. Once you start practicing one, you're going to have to eventually practice all of them, because they come as a chain link. So as soon as you start doing one, another chain gets linked, another chain gets linked, another chain gets linked. And it's the same thing. Whatever we familiarize ourselves with is what we link ourselves to. So when you familiarize yourself with negativity, that's what's going to have the audacity. That's what's going to have the audacity to look at something positive happening in your life. And immediately, instead of being able to celebrate that, the audacity of negativity is going to say, but you could have gotten more. But why didn't this person do this? Or why it takes so long for this to happen? Or why? And then they start immediately, instead of being able to appreciate the thing that you've received, or appreciate the person, or appreciate whatever God is doing in your life, immediately you start belittling it and tearing it down, because you've become so familiar with the spirit of envy, because you've now become so familiar with the spirit of gossip, because you've now come so familiar with the spirit of comparison, that nothing that happens in your life is good enough anymore. And that started small. It started in one area, but then it graduated and it multiplied and it linked with other things, and it became more and it becomes more. And that's what happens every time we give these spirits legal right to take hold and become familiar with us. And when we come under stress, or when we come under difficult situations, we don't run to unfamiliar places. We run to what feels safe, which is our familiar space. We run back to what worked in the last season. We run back to what we feel like gives us a sense of control. So whatever it is that we have been familiar with will be where we run to. So if we make ourselves familiar with the kingdom of darkness, when things get hard, that's where we're going to go. But if we make ourselves familiar with the kingdom of God, when things get difficult, that's where we're going to go, because that's home. That becomes home. That becomes a familiar space. That becomes a place where when you have stepped away from it, you feel like you're lost. I can speak for myself. Whenever I don't spend time, or I drift away, or I get too busy, or allow other things to take precedent, I feel lost, because I've become so familiar with the presence of God that when I'm away from him, or when I'm not as intentional about being in his space and I feel lost. I feel unfamiliar. I feel naked. I feel agitated. I feel I need to go back home. I need to spend time with God. I need to be with my Father. Because the longer I'm away from home, I get homesick, and other things start to try to seep in, because I need something comforting. I need something familiar. So then, because I'm not being intentional about spending time with God, I'm now going back to old behaviors. I'm now going back to old spaces that used to give me joy when I was in the kingdom of darkness. It's not that it doesn't feel good. It does. So that's why you want to go back there. That's why when you feel sad, you go to the kitchen and get a bottle of ice cream. That's why when you just went through a breakup, you want to go and snuggle up in your bed or cover and just cry. These are familiar spaces that you go that worked in a specific season. So if we're not being intentional about making the presence of God familiar, about spending time with the word, so that's what comes up and out of us when stress takes over. Whatever we're familiar with is what's going to take control, is what's going to have the audacity to come up in those moments. So what are you familiar with? What has the audacity to come up and out of you? Because you've given it free reign, because you've made it home, because you've given it permission, you've given it legal right. What spirit have you given the audacity? What spirit are you familiar with? I'm doing that self-examination this week, because I've noticed some things. So I'm tapping into that. So I'm sharing that with you. What has the audacity? What have you become familiar with? I love you. Have a good day.